Morning, everybody. Welcome to Rookie Card Collector 123. Today, we're going to talk about a recent, very large purchase of a sports card, which took place over this past weekend in a heritage auction sale. The card for discussion will be the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant autographed dual patch basketball card. I believe was from 2007. Was produced by Upper Deck. Um, the card sold for just under $13 million in heritage. The buyer of the card, along with two partners, I guess it was bought under a group ownership type of scenario. Um, Created a syndicate to purchase the card rather than the three members of the syndicate individually bidding against each other, probably driving up the price of the card even further. Um, the main guy who was the head of the purchase is somebody who recently made an offer to buy TikTok, which I understand is still on the table for $20 billion. His net worth is estimated at $400 million, I believe. His other two partners are also obviously substantially wealthy. Um, there's a lot of talk in the hobby about whether this is a good thing for the sports card world, the sports card hobby, or it's not, as well as a lot of talk between modern collectors and vintage collectors like myself as to the fact that the card in question is a 2007 basketball autograph patch card of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, which obviously is not the most pleasing thing in the world to those of us that collect vintage and appreciate the older um, rarity based on supply rather than rarity based on manufactured uh, rarity, one of one types of cards like this basketball card. So I guess recently in the last few years, a lot of hard feelings between the vintage collecting side and the modern collecting side, and I'll also include Pokemon collectors in the modern collector side of things. Um, at this point, with the prices of things getting so out of hand and ridiculous, and to me just unjustified, um, I think the battle is really not should not be between the vintage collectors and the modern collectors. I think the real battle and where the real underlying problem is, it's between the collectors slash hobbyists who are the backbone of the hobby that are in it for the long haul. They're not looking for the next quick buck, and when that comes up, they'll just move on and they're out of sports cards. Um, I think the real issue is between the collector slash hobbyist and the investor. Um, Collector hobbyists tend to be those who, a lot of times, middle class people. They work their whole life. These have decent jobs. Are able to support the family and discretionary income that's left over from providing all the necessities of life. They get to use towards a hobby like sports cards or comic books or stamp or coin collecting, any of these kinds of hobbies. Um, the investor side tends to be the people that are in the self-employed um, technology world, investment bankers, stock traders, um, sometimes attorneys, doctors, but not so much. I think generally more the first few groups that I mentioned. And these people over decades since the sports cards began in the 19th century, all the way back then. If you had the people back in the early days, like a Henry Rockefeller, um, Henry Ford. If you had people like that that were at the time the richest people in the world that had the most money, if those people ever decided to get into the sports card hobby, collecting sports cards, the collectors of the day would never be able to buy anything because those guys had the money to buy whatever they wanted. Fortunately for the sports card hobby back then, and it was very minimal, I'm sure. Fortunately for the people that were collectors, they did not have to worry about people like that. The people like that, they were buying real estate, they were buying mansions. As time went on, and technology advanced, they were buying private jets, they were buying yachts, they were buying, Hollywood mansions. These are the kind of things with people that had that kind of money. That's what they were doing. And again, if they ever decided to get into sports cards, even a few, very few of them, it would have completely changed, the entire landscape of card collecting. But that never happened. So now fast forward through the more modern times, through the mid-century, the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. Still at this point, the sports cards did not have any significant value. By the 70s, maybe the T206 Honda Wagner was starting to approach the $1,000 price tag as the most valuable card in the hobby all the way back then. But that was pretty much it. Everything else was primarily a few dollars to maybe $100 or so. Mantles were probably still under $100. Um, Carrying forward all the way through the 80s, the 90s, you have software companies, technology companies like Apple and Microsoft and guys like Bill Gates. Again, if any of those people ever decided to get into sports cards, either collecting, investing in sports cards, again, those of us that were after the bigger, higher demand cards could never compete with that kind of a potential situation. But again, in the 80s, 90s, none Bill Gates or nor anybody else at that level of finances was collecting or into sports cards. So we did not have to compete against that. We competed against basically the other collectors, the other hobbyists that had similar resources to those like myself. And and that's how it stayed into the 2000s, the turn of the century again, um, all the way through the 2000s and the 2000 teens. The same, basically the same scenario. The Warren Buffetts and people like that had tons of money. Nobody ever got into sports cards at any kind of significant level. So again, the market remained flat, especially the vintage market, steady, slow, steady growth, but nothing ever, no, barely a blip on the radar if you tracked it over time. Now, COVID comes, and a lot of people, as we all know, everybody was at home, they were stuck, they couldn't travel, they couldn't spend money on other things. People started to rekindle interest in sports cards. People that were never into sports cards started to see on the Good Morning America news shows across the country. There was baseball card sales appearing on these news channels, um, crossing over into mainstream America as opposed to just being a hobby anymore. So with that, you get the high net worth people like the Bill Gateses and the Warren Buffetts and people like that now starting to see this stuff pop up on the news. And of course, people at that level, one of their main interests in life is the publicity. Anything that's going to get them publicity, kind of whether it's good or bad, just the getting the publicity is huge for them. And it's a pride thing. It's a whatever. So back in 2021 or so, at the peak of the sports card market, around March 2021, prices were starting to become insane, and the reason for that is now looking back at it years later, we had a lot of new people, including investors, young people that just got out of school and family had enough money, or however they ended up coming across the financial part of it, started buying up stuff, and that was starting to take over the hobby that was kind of at a slow, steady pace, and nobody ever spent beyond their means. You know, if a card typically sold in the $1,000 range, nobody was going to buy it for $10,000 just because you had $1 million and the money was not an object. You just didn't do that. It didn't happen. Well, now after post COVID or during COVID, this is the kind of stuff that was happening, and people were spending ridiculous amounts of money on cards that were priced many times lower a couple of years earlier, several years earlier, and there's a lot of theories as to why that started happening. One of the prevailing theories is that people just started looking at life as being life could be so short, and everybody's living for the moment and everybody's living for today and not worried about the future, retirement, investments, things like that. People are just going out now and getting whatever they want now, and that feeds into the mentality of the generation of kids growing up these days, where if they need an answer to a research question, it's not go dig out the encyclopedia and look it up in alphabetical order. It's go to Google, type in the thing you want the answer to, hit submit, and in 3 seconds you have the answer to your question. So the answer's there now. Everything's become now. So hence we're at where we're at today. People are paying $13 million for a Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant autograph patch card. And some people in the hobby are trying to put a positive spin on this, saying, well, it's good publicity for the hobby. It's on the national news, kind of like the whole 2020, 2021 COVID thing all over again. Well, to me, it's not good publicity for the hobby. The way I see it is what's good for the hobby is when the hobbyists and the collectors are thriving and collecting, and that's what's good for the hobby in general overall, sports card collecting. The fact that somebody has $13 million to spend on the basketball card and goes out and buys it in an auction, to me that doesn't really prove anything other than they had more money than anybody else and they wanted it, so they got it. There's no amount of respect that I have for that type of, not that type of person. I don't know the person. So there's no type of respect for the collecting abilities of that scenario. I have much more respect for the person that, over 20 years has a middle class family, middle class income, works for 30, 40 years until retirement age, and little discretionary income they have every year or every so often they put away, they put into some cards and stuff that they think would be players they enjoy collecting, that kind of thing. And at the end of retirement, now they've got a lot of time on their hands to go back and look through the collection and maybe upgrade some things and sell some things, buy some other things. That collector that amassed that collection over time like that, with a somewhat limited budget, we'll assume, much more respect for the person who's able to put together a world-class, top-notch collection, as opposed to the person that made their money however they made it. People have started technology companies, sold them, investments, whatever, family was rich. Much more respect for the people that built the collection through hard work and again, not a lot of income, had to find the smart ways, what to buy, when, where to buy it from, how much to pay, as opposed to the person that just had more money than anybody else. And I'm sure they have a world-class collection. If they wanted to buy a yacht or a private jet or something, they could just do that too, and they could have the best yacht or the best jet in the world because they have more money than anybody else. So to me, I was hoping that, this bubble that happened during COVID and the explosion and then stuff has come down quite a bit. Um, what we see is the stuff that came down is the kind of the collector, hobbyist type of stuff. So what I mean by that is the everyday card collector. Um, let's just use it as let's say we use it as an example. $1,000 a month is a hobby budget for a typical card collector in 2025. With today's salaries and all. So $1,000 a month, you can buy whatever. You can buy a 55 Hank Aaron and a PSA 6. Maybe you can buy a couple of Ernie Banks cards. Whatever you like to collect, but somewhere in the vicinity of $1,000 a month. So all the stuff that falls into that kind of price range, whether it's golden age, pre-war, modern, whatever, all the stuff that falls into that price range from 2020, 2021 peak, like we said, March 21, up until today, 2025 in August. From the peak price, every single one of those items, almost to an exact one, is down. Values are down from what they were in 2020, 2021 at the peak. The stuff that's not down is the stuff that's up and continues to increase, and prices continue to be crazy to me anyway, is the quote unquote higher end stuff, the stuff that's not in the budget friendly price range that most of the collectors slash hobbyists would fall into. It's the stuff like the T206 Wagner, it's the Sporting News Babe Ruth rookie, it's the 52 Topps Mantle, it's the not only those multi-million dollar cards, but it's also the $1 million card, the $500,000 card, the $250,000 card, the $100,000 card, the $50,000 card. That's the stuff that keeps going up and has not come down during that period from COVID up until August 2025, up until today. And it continues not to come down because there's still people out there that are willing to spend these ridiculous amounts of money to buy it. If people just stopped spending, it would force the market down, auctions would sell for much lower prices, and everything would come down, including not just the marginal type of stuff, like the 50s and 60s mid-grade Topps and Bowman, but the premium stuff that everybody wants to own. Just because I don't have $20 billion to throw around, I'd like to have a Sporting News Babe Ruth rookie card just as much as the guy that has $20 billion that can just go buy one or two or five or 10 or whatever. So that's kind of my viewpoint on what's going on in the hobby. The most recent large sale or large purchase from the Heritage Auction for the Jordan Bryant autograph patch card. And unfortunately, I guess I'm in the minority. I still think eventually that rational thinking is going to prevail and prices are going to start to get more back to normal. The investors that got into it strictly for the money will probably move on to the next big thing where they can make even more. And the hobby will kind of get turned back over to the collectors slash hobbyists. But the more time that goes by, now it's been about 5 years since the peak, 4 or 5 years, I'm starting to think more and more that it's never going to change. And unfortunately, what that does in the bottom line is it prices out a lot of the collectors slash hobbyists that have been in the hobby for 20, 30, 40 years, like myself. And again, it's very easy to come back and say, well, just if you can't afford these high price cards, buy something that you can afford. Well, I'm not willing to settle for second rate stuff. Why should I have to settle for it just because I don't have the money to spend irrationally like somebody else does? So anyway, please feel free to leave comments down below, and like to hear other people's thoughts. This has just been kind of something brewing with me for quite a while, for several years now, and just thought I'd put a video out there now that I have this YouTube channel to kind of get it off my chest, I guess. And I look forward to any responses, and have some more different topics, hobby topics to discuss in the future, as opposed to the original direction that I was looking at, pointing my channel towards. So anyway, hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.